Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Atlantic Dialogues 2021, especially to the session Making the African Continental Free Trade Area Work. I am Professor Landry Signé, a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, as well as senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and managing director at the Thunderbird School of Global Management. I will be your moderator for today. As a matter of fact, the African Continental Free Trade Area was launched in 2018, and a sufficient number of countries have ratified the AfCFTA by May 2019, and the AfCFTA was officially launched in January 2021. The critical importance of the AfCFTA should not be overstated. It is the largest trade area, free trade zone, per number of countries since the creation of the World Trade Organization. And if successfully implemented, the African Continental Free Trade Area will also contribute to reach about 6.7 trillion of US dollar of combined consumer and business spending by 2030, and over 16.12 trillion of US dollar of combined consumer and business spending by 2050. Moreover, some studies, including by the World Bank, have shown that by 2035, the AfCFTA has the potential to lift over 30 million people out of poverty, as well as to substantially increase the income of 68 million people at the bottom of the pyramid, and add more than 450 billion people of continental outcome. However, in order to deliver on its promises, the AfCFTA has to be successfully implemented. And in order to discuss on the phenomenal opportunities and challenges that the AfCFTA has to address, we have three distinguished panelists with us today. We have Edem Adzogenu, who is the co-founder of Afro Champions Initiative and based in Ghana. So you can have your bio. So I will just present your main title. So that if I have to read the entire bio, maybe here for another hour, given your incredible accomplishments. So we also have Laoye Jaola, who is the CEO of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group and based, of course, in Nigeria, facilitating public-private dialogues. And we finally have Dominique Lafont, CEO of Lafont Africa Corporation and senior advisor to BCG France. Without taking longer, let me start with you, Laoye. Should we be confident about the future of the AfCFTA? Can you unmute?
Should we be confident about the future of the AfCFTA? Yes, I think we should be confident about the future. And I want to speak to three major things that should give us confidence. First and foremost, I look beyond where we are today. I look at the young demography in the African continent, right? Noting that over 1.3 we have half of the 1.3 billion Nigerians we have are under 25. And roughly 3 out of every 4 is above 35. And the young people, unlike my generation, increasingly know their rights. And they are increasingly seeking better quality of life and demanding some level of accountability from their government. And because of the kind of young people that we have, and we saw the demonstration of this, not only in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, and other areas, where people are demanding better conditions of living and access not only to the good things of life, but they're increasingly demanding that government should work for the people. So the building young and very, very energetic and educated and experienced young people gives me confidence. In addition to that, when we look at technology and the entrepreneurial spirits of young African people, I am very, very excited, and I know that they will make the African Continental Free Trade Agreement work. I mean, the emerging technologies that we're talking about, the 3D technology printer, the advanced materials, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all of these things are things that many young African people are getting increasingly savvy about it. And not to forget the fact that even during this COVID period, the amount of resources and the amount of money that the young African tech startups were able to raise, running to over about 1.5 billion in 2020. Despite the fact that you might tell me that's not much, but despite the fact that that was COVID, and the fact that those guys have raised that is something that is commendable and we can talk about. And therefore, looking at their innovation spirit, entrepreneurial spirit, and the fact that they are building bridges across the continent, it gives me confidence. But the third, which again is the third leg of it, is the fact that whether we like it or not, we're beginning to see some deepening. Forget the last challenges we have in the last two months or about. But we're seeing deepening democracy and rising income level in some parts of Africa. And because this is happening, you then ask people demanding for freedom of speech, that they're demanding for election, and they're demanding for not only just election for the sake of it, but they are demanding for perfect election. They are demanding for increased representation. And so these three factors put together gives me the confidence that, look, AfCFTA is come to stay. There are no other challenges for the now, but I know that the future is bright.
Thank you so much. Dominique, what is your perspective on this? You are muted, Dominique.
So, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, I am saying that it will happen ultimately, but I believe that the path will be quite long because we cannot rule out that the free trade area, the free trade continent will happen right away, will take place right away. There are a long series of prerequisites which will have to be taken into account and which cannot be met without some time. And I believe in particular that the biggest challenge is how to implement the free trade continental union without giving a major impulse to the biggest countries and without ensuring that it would not happen to the detrimental of the weakest countries. Countries with less natural resources, hinterland countries, or countries with less good port facilities. And I think this is, if we consider this issue in practical terms, we can see that we can only state that most countries spend a lot of energies defending themselves and defending their own interests, their own national interests. For instance, once an African country has some good position or a competitive edge in order to develop a specific national industry, it will immediately take a lot of imagination to set up what you call in English the non-formal barriers, non-formal custom barriers that will preserve their growing national industry. And this is very understandable. And so you have had one very self-explanatory example in recent years. A few years ago, you know, countries like Mali and Burkina Faso used to import 100% of their cement. The cement production which was produced either in Ivory Coast or in Senegal. And one day these two countries they just forbid the import of cement, which forced cement companies to develop local industries. Does this story take place? Does this story comply with the rules of the project of free trade continental area? Probably not. Does it preserve medium-term interest of Mali and Burkina Faso? Surely yes. So this is, I think, one of the very important issues that has to be taken into consideration. We have a French expression saying ne pas laisser le loup entrer dans la bergerie. Don't leave the wolf get into the farm. And this is where I think the evil is hiding himself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dominic. So we have a perspective between Laoye, who think that there's a phenomenal potential, and Dominic, who think that the tensions between the national interest and the regional dynamics may constitute a challenge to the successful implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Let me turn to Adam. Adam, you have been involved both in in facilitating public-private partnership investment among other, including with the African Continental Free Trade Area and the African Union and the private sector. So what is your take on the prospects of the AfCFTA? Can you unmute, Adam?
Thank you very much, Prof. And I'm glad you mentioned the public-private aspect, because I believe that there's definitely considerable commitment on the part of both the public sector and the private sector to see this thing going. We've seen that from the political commitments we've seen. We've seen that in the speed with which we've seen ratifications that are unparalleled in the history of the continent, where we've received those number of ratifications that have deposited their instruments. We've seen the cohesion among the regs. We've seen the customs unions. We've seen the discussions going on with the central banks on the payment platforms with the likes of Afri-Exim Bank. So there's clear some commitment going on there like we've never seen before. And of course, there's also the discussions going on with respect to issues around harmonizing, these tariffs, schedules, and things like that. And I think we've got probably about 85, 87% now negotiated, and now looking towards textiles and automotives. So I think in that regard, you could say there's been some considerable progress as far as the political commitment is concerned. And the challenges, of course, are exactly what previous speakers have spoke about, which is how do you move beyond this to things like competition policy? This is where the issue of the big countries are going to come in. How do you also make sure that the big multinational companies are not the only beneficiaries? For this to make sense, it has to benefit their startups, it has to benefit their SME ecosystem. And that's where the public-private sector comes in. For too long on the continent, we've seen a lot of policies at the continental level that always end up being inimical to the interest of those who have to be implementers of that policy, or those who have to be beneficiaries of that policy. We all know that governments do not trade. It's companies that trade. Therefore, the question then becomes, how well is the private sector vested in this understanding of what is required of them, and how they also can take advantage of the CFTA? There's no doubt on my mind that the private sector is also extremely very committed. We see that in all of the sensitization work, the support that private sector organizations are giving not only to the CFTA Secretariat, but also to strengthen capacities of government with a view of getting industrial associations, with a view of making sure that their ecosystem and SME base understand the importance of the CFTA. I think where the innovation is going to happen and where the challenge remains, it's the unique work that the public and private has to do together by taking a project approach. And by this, I mean that there are only certain things that only governments can do. There are only things that private sector can do. But as long as they continue to do these things in silos, the cohesion that is going to be required to ensure that we can drive this integration will not happen. Because Africa remains largely siloed by infrastructure. I mean, our infrastructure deficits are high. So to begin to look at what it will take to build the rail and road that will interconnect our countries, the shipping lines, and among other things, could take time. We think that where the opportunity is the soft infrastructure, using digitalization as a driver, and also taking advantage of our demographic dividends, because a lot of our youth now think technology and innovation and digitalization, and begin to build that guardrails that will ensure that e-commerce, commerce, movement of people, movement of goods, all of these things are happening across digital platforms that break the barriers that exist currently. The architecture or the governance architecture of those things require working very closely with governments to ensure that data and other things are shared, interoperability among platforms, among other things. And that's where, for me, exactly some of the challenges lie, because we'll end up replicating what we've done within the physical infrastructure space with also the soft infrastructure space, because everything will remain siloed. And it requires some real engineering architecture around what does government do? What does private sector lead? What does the intergovernmental institutions like the CFTA Secretariat lead? And making sure everything is happening in harmony to ensure that we can drive this integration agenda. And that's where I see a lot of these challenges, because we hear the economists talking, we hear the industrialists, we hear the scientists, we hear those are innovating, but are all of them taking a project approach towards driving this integration agenda with CFTA as the umbrella? That entrepreneurial activity within public-private is where I think we should be spending a lot more time, and where the challenge remains. Thank you.
Wonderful. Adam, you mentioned digitalization. How can digitalization help to address structural barriers to intra-area trade?
I'll start by giving a classical example. So if you take SMEs, say, trading in Togo, who are registering their products, or say Ghana, where I'm from, and these SMEs have to go and now register their products with the Food and Drug Authority before they can even sell these products in Ghana. But then when they need market access. And one of the biggest enablers of market access is the big malls that you find in Ghana, in Nigeria, like the ShopRites and others. Now, to be able to move those products into their shelves in those countries, they were required to go to, say, in this case, Nigeria, to go to NAFDAC and register all their products again. Now, if there is a mechanism by which, using digitalization, Nigeria has some kind of visibility on those countries for certain category of products, for example, like cocoa, which Nigeria doesn't grow, for example. So if you have these SMEs being able to now register their products, upload their registration material documents and things, and Nigeria's visibility on that, we save a lot of time for this and remove a lot of non-tariff barriers for this SME's ability to be able to get to these markets. And the same applies to sanitary standards between, say, Malawi and Zambia. So how do you ensure that this person who is showing up saying, I registered my product, actually did register the product? The only way to be able to legitimately know that is if it's digitized, and be able to now give access to the platform to other countries to be able to do that. And it will lift a big burden on the shoulders of these SMEs who just basically have ingenuity, have capacity to produce and create, because remember, a lot of innovation does not take place within the bigger multinationals. In fact, they normally want to do away with, they can't take those risks, basically. It happens at the SME level. That's how it's done in Europe and other parts of the world. But most of these guys are doing things in, say, Senegal, but are doing things in Senegal, but have no idea that there are people in Botswana who need those products, but don't even know they exist. So the other role digitalization plays is gives the opportunity for people to even know what exists. None of this, and also if you're looking for people to vet to find out whether the products they are selling is true, whether the services they are giving, you need lawyers. Not having all of these people on a digital platform that can validate that this person, and then you also need the fintech companies, you need the banks. All of these things can only happen on taking advantage of digitalization. It saves time, it saves travel, but more importantly, it gives you the opportunity to legitimize what you're doing to create that kind of trust that will facilitate trade and movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eden. Let me turn now to Dominic. What do you think, what role the local industrial policy could play in promoting the AfCFTA? Can you unmute, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I think there are a number of prerequisite and preliminary steps. One of the main preliminary steps would be probably to improve regional agreement. To improve, you already have a series of regional free trade agreements. And these regional free trade agreements have been implemented in a kind of unsatisfactory manner with many non-barrier limits. And the sensitive point which have to be negotiated, and I would suggest that it be negotiated on a preliminary regional scale, as it is easier to reach some kind of agreement based upon a regional area than based upon a continental area. So I think that one of the main prerequisites is to ensure that the regional free trade agreement are being improved and better implemented, which will force countries to discuss about the emergence of the regional market and how they would cope with the local demand and how they would cope with the legitimate national interest of each countries in order to ensure that this will foster industrial development in all countries and not only in the biggest one. I think this is a very critical point. If this is not well handled, I presume that countries will continue to defend their borders as they did before. Then you have other prerequisites. I think I can see maybe three main prerequisites. Maybe I presume there are many more, but in order to make the debate progress. One first prerequisite would turn around the business-friendly environment. This is what my estimated colleague hinted at when he talked about digitalization. Digital progress will be a driving force of implementation of the regional cooperation and the free trade cooperation, and this has to be implemented, and this has to be pursued with energy. and this relates to digitalization, everything which relates to free online registration, everything which relates, to all the regulation which only serve a national interest, which are disguised barriers as well. The simple facilitation, such as all procedures related to one center desk setup, all this is very, very useful. Another prerequisite would be all the needs for improving the logistic interconnections in order to reduce the logistic barriers for free trade and the emergence of regional markets. And when I'm talking of interconnection, I am talking of interconnection of the port to the hinterland, and this is the rail issue. And I am also talking of the interconnection between hub ports and secondary ports with feedering services and things like that, which used to exist 20 years ago in Africa and which have disappeared. And interconnection is a very also critical area, and this has to be fostered with a very strong political will. The issue of rail was evoked at the NEPAD period. I remember the president of Senegal saying that it was the first priority of NEPAD, and what have been the progress since all these fantastic speeches? Almost none. You have had progresses on the eastern part of Africa, not very few in the rest. Another area of prerequisite would be, I presume, on the currency issue. Again, we need to improve things, and if the foreign exchange control is officially banned, again, it is like non-tax barriers. You have many regulation and many obstacles which lead to the same consequences of as if you had a foreign exchange control or some kind of foreign exchange control.
Dominique, you have been managing director in the Bolloré Africa group, so in the Bolloré group, but focusing on Africa. So have you seen some countries outperforming other in those type of industrial policies?
Well, unfortunately, the continent is full of inequalities, especially inequalities between countries. It is much harder for a landlocked country to develop national industries than for a coastal country, for instance. It is very difficult for a country with a tiny population to develop a national industry than for Nigeria, for instance. Or for Ivory Coast, which is the locomotive of the Western area. And of course, you also have political issues. All these show that basically it was very difficult not to fall into the temptation of investing in the countries which has the best competitive edge, meaning the best geographical location, meaning some kind of power. And as a matter of fact, it was difficult. Basically, we could list three categories of countries: the countries with coastal countries with good population and good geographical location. These were the first-class countries. Then secondary countries, which were coastal countries with an average population and less good geographical location, which could not have the ambition of playing the role of hub. And the last category, or the most difficult category, was the landlocked country. So, For instance, I remember very well, during the political unrest in Ivory Coast, countries such as Burkina Faso and Mali was taken as hostages. You know, the political unrest of Ivory Coast, basically spoiled the whole decade between 2000 and 2011. And this situation was very difficult to handle for Mali and Burkina Faso, which were the landlocked countries. And so I don't know whether I have answered your question, but
wonderful.
I can tell you that even as a private operator, sometimes it was difficult to say, look, we need to give their chance also to these countries and not to put all our eggs in the same basket.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dominique. Laure, you engage extensively with the government on Nigeria on many of these issues related to industrial policies, among others. Would you mind expanding a little bit more on the Nigerian experience and how it could be connected with a broader continental policy, industrial policy?
Thank you very much. Again, one of the things you will admit, and I want to latch on what Dominic said, the fact that you see most of this country trying to be protective. They look inward. And therefore, if one sector of the economy is doing well, one industry sector is doing well, they want to protect their sector against external imports. And so what you see majorly is that government has been focused around import substitution, however inefficient we're doing, some level of protectionism. But part of the things that our engagement, like Adam talked about, is the engagement of private sector with government, is to realize that no matter how much you protect a sector, as long as that sector is not competitive, as long as there are cheaper and better quality alternatives, you can defend it ad infinitum. Therefore, in order to make your industry, your national industry competitive, you need to make the environment for their doing business a lot more attractive. You need to then work on the issues we talk around infrastructure and the more. So those has been our discussions with government. But each time we look at CFTA, there tend to be too much focus on trade. And I'm not saying that it's not bad if you look at trade. We sometimes underplay the role of services in all of those things. And I'm glad that you asked the question with them regarding digitalization. A number of services. Yeah, I can be a landlocked nation, but if my human capital development and human capital resources is top of the class, I can do a number of services and again move outside my country to another country, but I can do a number of services even within my country and doing some outsourcing job. So these are opportunities we have. So what I think will happen to nations is to pick and choose areas where they probably are going to develop competencies and work. And I always tell them, take what the Nigerian were doing in our creative sector in Nigeria. And to what extent can we, through a lot of policies around the competency, the intellectual property and computer policy, make it well that people can actually expand this beyond the shores of Nigeria and do it effectively well. The second thing is that things we're doing around digital economy and IT space are legal. So they're not to be done around services that go beyond trade and that go beyond just physical goods and services. But going back to another question you raised regarding some of them are small, I do agree that, the bulk of Africa is dependent on MSME, small and medium scale enterprises. But the beauty of CFTA, if we fully harness it, is that we're going to see even bigger companies relying on backward integration and making all of those companies much more efficient. Somebody had said that all of these goods are not produced by those big industries. They rely on local subsidies and co. So you have a responsibility of making those local subsidies and local small firms do very, very well, enhance the quality of their production. It is in that they begin to grow the income of the people. It's in that doing that you need to make the quality of their life a lot better. It's in that doing that you make the environment for doing business very well. So our engagement with government is focused on the fact that, look, there are a lot of potentials that are derivable from an effective African Continental Trade Agreement. But we need to put our house in order in terms of building our institutions. In fact, a very example one is that easy administration of justice. How do we want to begin to see our customs? Will our customs be revenue collector or facilitators of trades and work? I mean, so those are the issues that our engagement with them entails, so that we're not bogged down only on goods, but we're looking at services, we're looking at investment, we're looking at all of those things that make the potentials of AfCFTA realizable.
Excellent, Laurie. So, and in achieving those aspirations, how do you connect those policies with unlocking the potential of SMEs, which plays a key role across the continent in job creations, amount order, and while doing so also overcoming non-tariff barriers, as we know that in many areas, non-tariff barriers exceed tariff barriers.
Okay, I'm going to just take a sector and walk back a sector and use that as a basis for discussing things. I mean, currently in Nigeria, we have mass land, arable land that we're not exploiting as much as possible. The yield per acre in Nigeria is very bad. A lot of our farmers, where about 40 million Nigerians work, are living on a subsistence economy. Now, first and foremost, the backward integration and working and improving their value chain will help those people first in enhancing their yield per acre, in ensuring that we save post-harvest losses, in ensuring that we can do some level of value addition to what these farmers are doing. Now, these MSMEs, therefore, by the time we begin to do value addition, what then will happen is that the multinational companies that were hitherto to importing some of the things they import for their finished will then say, look, yes, this thing can be done locally. How do we put in place aggregators that will ensure consistent production? And then they will then work, the government will then work in areas of ensuring that this value-added products are moved into areas where real manufacturing sectors can use effectively. And once they do that, what that does is that it reduces their cost, right? And if our custom then begin to do effective trade facilitation, we're looking beyond Nigeria into the other countries in Africa. And I'll tell you, this is not only Nigeria looking at it. Other countries in Africa will begin to do similar things. And then you then find out that, you know what? If we can produce to feed ourselves in Nigeria, and we don't need to import food, first and foremost, you do a lot. Because if you look at our import bills, if you look at our current account in Nigeria for now, the bulk of what we spend after fuel importation, the next thing you are doing spending a lot of money on food importation. That in and of will take care of this MSMEs very, very well. And of course, part of what we're discussing with our MSME group is how do we engage these people and ensure that they're effectively prepared for CFTA? So the most recent amendments you will see in the Economy and Allied Matters in Nigeria is done in such a way that the ease of registration, the ease of formalization of these informal MSMEs, it will make it a lot easier for them. So there's a lot of changes in the regulation in such a way that's easier for those people. And so those are the steps and education and engagement we're doing with the private and public sector to prepare them for the eventual implication of CFTA on the continent.
Wonderful. Adam, you have been involved with SMEs development extensively. What role could SMEs play in achieving the AfCFTA, and how to ensure that the barriers that they face are also unlocked?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. So SMEs largely, again, depends on how we define them. They are those who just really are just replicating. So if you take people in the, say, the finance, the agricultural space, for example, there are those who are just pretty much doing subsistence work. And then there are just the petty traders, and then there are people who are like dressmakers and other things. So they are like your typical informal sector where they hire 2-3 people, and those 2 people also go and create, after they learn their apprenticeship, they go and also create their little shops and do their little trade. So they're not your typical people who are going to really add value with a view of being able to scale and be able to cross border. But they are the ones also who we have predominantly on the continent who are just basically, doing a lot of, taking a lot of imported goods and selling around. I think the role they can play, and then going to the other SMEs who are what I like to call the micropreneurs, who are basically doing a lot more of, so the woman who is actually doing the taking peanuts and adding value into peanut butter, the people who are doing cocoa products and adding value, and need funding for some of those things. I guess the way to get them to create value within these value chains is to architect it in a way that drives, because that apprentice I'm talking about, who is going to leave studying dressmaking and then eventually move to the point where he's going to have his little kiosk, will never be in a position to take an order for 50,000, say, police uniforms or soldier uniforms or hotel uniforms. But does have some skill. A lot of these people have some unique skill sets. But the challenge has been that they are the same people who are trying to figure out how to find a market, how to find funding, how to market their products, and eventually be able to pay tax as well. We think that if we can create this scaffolding around a lot of these SMEs. So first, being able to just identify the needs analysis on who they are, what they are doing, and a lot of that data exists already within banks, within microfinance institutions, among others. And then understand exactly what do they need to scale. So the person making the dye, for example, that is needed for the cotton industry or the cotton and textile value chains, if they know that they can get funding to be able to just focus on just producing the dyes, as opposed to be worrying about all the other things they need to do, like marketing and others, then, they will then go now into finding the people who are growing the plants that are going to be using for the dyes, and feed resources there. And naturally, those informal sectors will naturally become formal, because the mall that is looking to buy the organic products from that farmer has some standards regimes to follow. They need to make sure that food that the person is saying is growing comes from an organic farm, there are fertilizers used, and all of these things are just opportunity to create jobs for inspection companies, engineers. But it's for me, I think it's really in how you create the ecosystem for the economic activity to unravel itself. I think a lot of the energy lately has been putting in trying to just build capacity, training, and all of those things, without interconnecting the linkages in a way that can enable the formalization to happen on their own. So my sense is that the SMEs on their own have skills, they have some capacity, they need some help with training, they need some, standards, and also making sure that they're able to produce at the level where it's consistent. But if we can feed in a lot more engineering support, and also put in a lot more, funding, not funding the person per se, but using digitalization in a way that ensures that the funding only gets to them when you understand the value chains within which they're operating. So if I'm a person making baobab ice cream and I get my raw material from Togo, but I'm producing the ice cream in Benin, it's important to know that I need that baobab from Togo. But if by designing a system whereby the funding goes to take care of your raw materials to ensure that you produce what you say you're producing, in order that you can get all your inputs to be able to produce and meet the demand, because a lot of those things are coming from other countries anyway. So it's again going back to it's going back to digitalization again. How do you use digitalization to make them visible to banks, to fintechs, make them understand where to address their capacity issues, and be able to give them the support to be able to scale? Digitalization for me is the key. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Dominic, I know there are multiple engagements. Perhaps quickly, how can the AfCFTA set the stage for a new partnership with world economic powers?
Well, again, I think the path will be long and difficult, but I think this is critical that the continent embark on a more free trade global organization. I suggest that in terms of feasibility, we try to make it happen first on a regional basis. I would say that the continent has maybe 5 or 6 regional organizations. And but why I think is critical, it is because I think that it is the only way, by reaching some more free trade continental area and protecting the African boundaries, that Africa will have the chance to develop national industries, which is an absolute prerequisite for long-term development. So again, I think that all these needs to be well thought out, and taking the right distance with the political agendas, which make people dream and unfortunately often lead to some bitter disappointments from a people point of view. And so then, first step, I mentioned the prerequisite earlier. I think we need to have a good part of regional negotiation in order to ensure that every country, it is like the European Union, you know, people have to make compromises. And to understand is, if they want to reach a bigger interest together, they need to make some sacrifices. And this has to be understood, and some balance between well-gifted countries and less well-gifted countries has to be done among a kind of regional solidarity. Otherwise, I am afraid it will be difficult to implement.
You think that there's an opportunity to partner with the European Union, for example?
No. This is not what I was saying. You know, ultimately, once the regional free trade, once the continental free trade organization is being implemented, it means what? It means that it will greatly foster African industries, which means that Africa will create more value on its soil, which is extremely important. It will create more value, which means that people will get healthier, which means that the national savings will increase, which means that based upon those national savings, each country will have more means to invest. And which means that it would enrich, all this would enrich the trade between Africa and the rest of the world. Africa would no longer exchange its raw materials against industrial goods, but it would trade transformed goods against other transformed goods, and this is an absolute priority, because again, by setting the target of the continental free trade zone, it will lead to the path of regional integration, of a greater regional integration, which is a preliminary steps, which will further increase the emergence of African champions, and then naturally the intra-African trade, and then Africa could position itself in a much stronger position to contemplate the trade with the rest of the world.
Excellent point.
So the point is, I think that the free trade consideration should be considered outside some idealistic consideration. It is not a matter of ideology. It has to be done step by step. It will mean mutual concessions, and of course it will go along some kind of protectionism. I think this has to be understood.
Extremely important point. You are calling for pragmatism, and first to successfully implement the AfCFTA, and it is only through a successful implementation that the continent could be stronger in engaging with the rest of the world and with other partners. So this is a wonderful point. And let me move to Laoye. So we have seen the regional comprehensive economic partnership being launched in Asia. We have ASEAN. And so what do you think those players could help, how they could help the AfCFTA being successful? Do we have a competition? Do we have potential partnerships?
Well, I think, like, again, I want to agree with what Dominic said. Charity must begin from home. In other words, let us strengthen ourselves within Africa before we begin to look at other new partnerships and whatever. If you get what is right, a review of current what stands at an EU-African partnership will be necessary because the terms and the conditions will have completely changed. And therefore, we'll then go back and then review. But, and for instance, whatever is in AGOA today will change because we will then have strengthened ourselves and prepared ourselves to engage World Economic Order. And so my position will be, let us strengthen the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Like it said, the various regions should even strengthen their work. In those days, we would have thought that ECOWAS would be far ahead of where we are. And despite all the work in ECOWAS, we're still lagging behind. And that's why, again, when you talk about the challenges that AfCFTA faces, you say, yes, they are real because we haven't done much in Africa. The SADC region hasn't done as much as they want to do. So my own preoccupation will be there's a potential for, of course, to set the stage for a new economic partnership with world economic power. But those potentials will just remain mere potentials unless we work and prepare ourselves as Africans and make it work within Africa. So those opportunities remain, but they will take you and pick you and use you anyhow until you do what you do. I mean, I'm one of those that believe that the current EU-African Partnership Agreement does not serve the interests of Africa. But that's the level where we are. So until we work aright, and then prepare ourselves, we then can review whatever agreement people have, and then we will pick the one that interests us, and the one that does not interest us, we will not sign on to. But there's a lot to be done within Africa. That will be my motivation.
Thank you very much, Laole. So, Adam, we know the dynamics with between China, the competitions between China, the USA, the European Union, and many other players on the continent. To what extent do you think that the AfCFTA could really set the stage for a new economic partnership with these specific players?
Well, the one thing that all African countries have in common is trade deficit. And that's simply because we're depending on goods, and in most cases goods, and then in some cases services from outside of the continent onto our continent. My view is that the capacity to be able to create at scale is one thing that the likes of China, EU, and all these other partners have. The challenge the continent has is the infrastructure to be able to just move goods from, I mean, the logistical nightmare of, say, just moving cotton from western part of Africa to the mills in East Africa, and then to Southern Africa, etc. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at cost of energy, cost of transportation, it ends up being cheaper to bring these things from China and other places. So that's what we face. But what those countries have been successful in doing is being able to ride on the back of, so basically absorb their collective strengths, right? So riding on the back of their multinationals, their SMEs to ride on the back of their multinationals, to be able to move goods and make it competitive and be able to compete globally competitively. I think that's where Africa needs to position itself as well, to begin to allow the multinationals, what our colleague called the African champions, allow the SMEs to be able to integrate into their value chains by being able to produce at scale and then also be able to help them be competitive. Once we're able to identify the sectors in which we have competitive advantage, whether it's in cocoa value chains, whether it's in cotton value chains, once we're able to create that, it strengthens our bargaining position where we go to partner the likes of the Toyotas, the likes of China and others, in where we can bring competitive value or complementary value to the kind of partnerships we desire to forge either on the continent or elsewhere. So I guess the homework starts by first identifying how we bridge, we create the hubs around where our competitive strengths are within the continent. And then naturally it becomes easier because then you go into these relationships playing fair. But it would be almost impossible for SMEs on their own or even any of our multinationals on their own to think they can go into partnerships with Europe and other who are coming with the financial strengths of the balance sheets of their companies and think you will get into an operation that will be fair. So that would be my approach. Thank you.
Wonderful. And what do you think, and that is to both Edem and Laole, so what do you think the role the diaspora could play in supporting the AfCFTA, in making the AfCFTA work, and whether the global diaspora around various continents or the African diaspora in Africa? Laole first.
Thank you. I mean, look, the diaspora, so we have two key advantages that they can make available to make the CFTA work. They have human capacity. So in terms of skills required, in terms of the knowledge base we require, and given what digital space is doing for us, that they can make available at the disposal of their various governments to ensure that we get these policies right. The other thing is, of course, about investment. Now, not only can they help us do diaspora remittances, they again are in a position that they can facilitate investment that can help us build a much needed structure. So as they continue to partner with their natives and locals, we then can put a structure in place that allows for the kind of PPPs that can work, that make government effective, that make the environment for doing business effective, that make our institutions very, very effective, and then provide the needed funding. Those are the things I think in the main. Those two things in the main, if they begin to arrange themselves and make them available, believe you me, we will solve those problems sooner rather than later. And you see part of the things you see regularly around Africa, among Nigeria, is that everybody is going out and going out. And I always tell people, I understand why they're going out, but I haven't gone out and settled. It's important for you to know that this continent still remains yours. Whatever it is you can do in terms of your skills, your competencies, your exposures, your finances, and your network to build an Africa that we're proud of, please make it available.
Thank you, Laole. Edem?
In taking a project approach, so I think the inspiration is there, the desire is there, but we need to drill these things down to actual projects and be able to scope it in such a way that people see where they bring their value, their resources, and what is the considerable return. I always like the soft infrastructure part because I know that the hard infrastructure, like the investments that need to go into ports, rails, and all of those other things we need, airports and energy, which is very important for the continent. Those things take time because of the project preparation requirements, among others, which again, the diaspora can bring a lot of value in. But it's also the soft infrastructure where the diaspora has demonstrated. And by soft, I mean, if you look at the creative industry, for example, you take the fashion industry, you take the NBA, the sports industry, you take the art industry. There's just enough that Africa continues to dominate in the diaspora and contribute so much to the GDPs of those countries just because of the jobs they create for branding, for fashion power, for engineers, sound engineers, for entertainers, for food industry, among many, many other catering industries, just because of the talent that exists within Africa that we are not unlocking, but those talents find themselves into the diaspora, either by continental Africans or Africans already in the diaspora, and are dominating those spaces globally, whether it's in Hollywood, whether it's in the music industry, among others. We think that that's where, again, we can, working very closely with the diaspora, be able to create industries within those creative industries. I mean, we've seen what Nigeria is already doing with this Afrobeat culture and beginning to dominate the world in that space. I believe that that's another area that if we play a lot more advocacy, do a lot of advocacy, we can begin to now rebrand. I mean, fashion alone contributes more to the GDP of France than aerospace and many of the other bigger, I mean, even the automobile industry, as a matter of fact. And Africa has a lot of stories, has a lot of talent, both within the continent and the diaspora. But creating projects out of it is where we're challenging, where people can begin to see where they can bring value and transfer their skills and competences to support that in a way that creates commercial value. So that's another area I think we should pay a lot more attention, that the diaspora can bring a lot of value in. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, let me just again add one thing. Did it help us to tell the African story? You guys are out there, and there's need to begin to tell the African story, because all the narratives we have about Africa is not altogether correct. There are bad cases, no doubt, but there are wonderful things that Africans are doing. We didn't begin to tell our story. Take over the media, tell the African story. Sometimes when I look, people value investment, and they'll say, after the risk-free investment, this is the cost of risk for Africa. I've seen many costs they put on us, and I've seen costs in other areas of the world, and I say, these are more riskier than us compared to what they have. But that's their perception. That's the story that they get. So the diaspora needs to begin to work with us to tell the African story. Unless we will tell our story, nobody's going to tell our story for us.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Larry, for this point. So the diaspora could act as ambassador for the continent, investor, human capital, technology transfer, other points. To conclude, I want you, perhaps just in a minute, to make your key recommendations for the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretary General Wamkele Mene, of to head of state and government in the continent, how to make the AfCFTA work. If you have a minute to share your perspective. And Adam.
To begin to, we know they're preoccupied with getting their tariffs and rules of origin ready, because without that we cannot trade under the CFTA. But we want to encourage them to work more closely with the private sector, because the private sector, in the last 15 to 20 years, we've seen the emergence of multinationals that are integrating the continent through their cross-border operations and investments much quicker and faster than the regional economic councils have even done. I mean, we see EcoBank that has integrated 33 financial markets, Dangote Group, 16 telecom, industrial markets, MTN, 20 telco markets, and I can go on and on and on, the finance, especially in the service area. Of course, in the goods, it takes time because you need all the regulatory things in place, you need infrastructure, but beginning to work with will begin to help us understand where the gaps are, but we have to co-create and co-innovate together as we go. This is uncharted territory. There are roles that only private sector can play, there are roles that only the civil society can play, roles that our academia can play. We all need to work together and take a project approach, an entrepreneurial approach. And my thing is that those entrepreneurs are not only in the private sector, they're in the public sector and our intergovernmental institutions as well. And that's why Afro Champions focus is bringing them together to work together in a project approach to drive this integration agenda. So the message is work with us more closely. Thank you.
Wonderful. Laole?
Thank you. I mean, I'm very brief. Look, governments will meet and discuss. Most of our countries in the African continent recognize the fact that the private sector have key roles to play. But what we've seen is that we've seen much of this just talked about, but not sufficiently practical step to ensure that the private sector are in the room. And there is an African adage that says that when you clap with one hand, you don't get it done well. You need to clap with both hands. Like Edem said, we need a private sector in the room. Government should facilitate and allow these people to run businesses. It's very important. But having said that, unless we give our environment a place where there is security and safety of life and property, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement will go nowhere.
Thank you very much, Dominique, Edem, Laoye, for an incredibly insightful session on making the AfCFTA work for the Africa we want, part of the series of the Atlantic Dialogues 2021. We are also incredibly grateful to the audience who has stayed with us, as well as to the organizer, and we enthusiastically look forward to continuing the conversation. I'm Landry Signé, and it has been a pleasure to engage with you. See you very soon.